All right, this talk is called How to Nail a Tech Interview in Japan. And this is going to be based on kind of some of my experiences living in Japan, working as a software developer, and now kind of running my own company. So yeah, I'm Eric, Eric Turner. You may have seen me around on Twitter. I am the founder of a website called Japan Dev, which is basically a job board for people who want to find like more English friendly, foreigner-friendly jobs in tech here in Japan. So, if you are looking for a job, could be a good place to start your search. Just a little bit about my background quickly, just because you may be wondering, like, why should you listen to me? I have been working in Japan for a bit over 10 years now, actually. The first year I was an ALT, so that's how I got to Japan. I was basically a language teacher just for that first year. And then I switched to being a software developer. First at a startup just as a Ruby developer. And then I kind of worked my way through a few different companies. Most recently working at a company called Mercari, where I was both a software engineer and then a later manager as well. So like an engineering manager, which meant that I was working as like a hiring manager and looking at resumes and things like that as well. So I've kind of seen this process of applying to jobs from both sides, both as an applicant myself and then later, doing interviews and looking at resumes and things like that. And then now I'm working full time on my own business, Japan Dev, where again, it is a hiring platform. So I'm seeing a lot of resumes coming in and, information about companies and things like that. So hopefully I'm able to kind of give some good tips and whatnot based on that experience that I've had through my over 10 years now here in Japan. So that's kind of my background and why I think hopefully I'll be able to maybe have some interesting thoughts on this topic. Cool. So first off, I've kind of split this into three sections. The first part is like before the interview, things to kind of prepare before you are even applying, things like resumes and cover letters. And then the second thing is going to be the coding interview. So maybe the scariest part of a tech interview is going to be the actual coding part. And not every company in Japan will actually have like a live coding type portion of the interview, but a lot do. So I'm going to go into some tips regarding that. And then lastly, I want to talk a little bit about the non-coding aspects of the interview. I find that is actually maybe the best place to really like leave your mark, because with coding, it really comes down to your skills. And it's largely a question of like, can you ride the bicycle or not? Whereas the non-coding parts, I think it can actually have a lot of leverage for you where you can kind of tell your story. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I think you can do that. So first off, I think I want to start with the process for actually preparing before you actually start the interview itself. And the first thing that I would think is a good thing to focus on is your resume. So I wrote a guide, the Japan Dev resume guide, so you can check that out if you want. I'll share these slides later. And then I have like a template as well. But I think it would be good to actually just look at my template. Let me see if I can share this. This is the template that I've kind of arrived at after my time in Japan. It is maybe not 100% perfect, but I think it's a good kind of starting point. And let me just go through quickly and kind of explain what I think are the kind of main things you want to keep in mind. So first, obviously, you have your name at the top. And then I would do like a phone number if you want. It's not even really necessary, but then email, definitely. I would do a basic location. A lot of people will put their address. I don't really think that's necessary. I would just say like what city you're in, what country, definitely they will want to know. And then like some links, LinkedIn, GitHub are probably the two biggest ones that I would add. But just like simply, I would try to add like not the HTTP and everything, just have it be as clean as possible. And then overall, like in terms of the design, I would say as much as you can fit onto like one page, ideally, or maybe a little bit longer, like 1.5 pages is fine. But a single column is one big thing that I would say. And I find it really like kind of cluttered looking if you have multiple columns and things like that. So I would try to keep it super simple in terms of the design, heading, simple text, next heading, some more simple text, that kind of thing. And then the first thing, a lot of people will have like like an objective. I would not recommend doing that. Instead, I would say like either a summary, or you can actually just not even have text here and just like kind of jump into like a quick overview of yourself, and ideally like kind of a more benefit-driven like paragraph or so, where it's like maybe a couple sentences where you're just saying, really the basics. A lot of people have like this super flowery language, and like kind of try to tell their life story in this paragraph. My opinion is just keep it super like simple, terse, and think about what the hiring manager will want to see. So in my case, like for example, I would say like backend engineer with 8 years of industry experience in Japan. I help startups build scalable backend systems. So like backend, Go, GCP, Kubernetes, the things that you're really focused on. And then like fluent Japanese speaker, permanent resident of Japan. And the goal here really is to just kind of go through that list that the hiring manager has in their head, where it's like, okay, do they have experience in Japan? Yes. Have they worked with Go, which is the language that we use? And you sit, and it's like, oh, quick. You can kind of just jump through and say, oh yeah, Go, I see it. And then do they speak Japanese though? Yes, they do. Do they have, a visa? Like, do we need to get them a visa? No, we don't. So I think that's like a quick way to kind of, just show an overview of why they should be kind of talking to you. Obviously, this is kind of the ideal case where you are like a good fit for the position. So sometimes it's a little bit harder to kind of pigeonhole it into, look like a good fit for the position, but still, I would try to recommend you do that as much as possible. And then I would go with experience next. Again, like two bullet points or so is plenty. As many numbers as you can throw in there as possible, as concrete as you can get it. I would try to do that. And then, yeah, obviously where you worked, the time period, like to the month, I think is fine. What technologies you used. And I think the biggest thing though really is to try to think about the position that you're applying to and personalize this to that. So that's something that I always tell people. So like very, very few people do this. So even if you just like update it at all, where you look at the job and you say, oh, they're looking for Go or they're looking for Ruby or whatever, and then you update it to really highlight that. If you've worked on a project with those things, you can move it to the top. You can rewrite things to try to highlight that a bit more. That makes a huge difference. And I think even just that one change will put you pretty much at the top, or in the top like few percent of people who are like actually putting time into their resumes. So it can really help stand out. And then education after that. Of course, if you don't have much experience or any experience, you can instead you can do things like adding projects here, and again, just try to make it as relevant as possible. Education, it might be more like bootcamp, or if you did have like a different degree or something like that, that's still helpful to add. Of course, I don't think you need to spend a ton of time on it though. Just like what degree was it, where, what year did you get it, and then like technical skills, I would usually add. And yeah, languages, especially since we're in Japan, they really want to know your English and Japanese levels. So I definitely add that. But yeah, I think that's enough personally. And it's pretty sparse, pretty straightforward. But you really, I mean, I wouldn't rely on any hiring manager taking more than like 10 or 15 seconds really in their initial check. And if nothing jumps out at them, then they're liable to just like kind of throw you off the side, you know what I mean? And not want to really talk to you. So to me, it's just like you really want to do your best to try and put something that's interesting to them in like somewhere that they're going to see it, ideally like as far as you can toward the top, and really at least get them to read the rest of the resume, if not give you an interview. So that's my goal. I think this is like a pretty good template to use. At least it's like clear, visual hierarchy and everything, because the worst is when it's like super cluttered and you don't know where to look. And that can it's surprising how like the design can actually cause a lot of like kind of mental overhead, So I would just, if you remember at least one thing, it's personalize it. And then I guess the second thing would be, make it very simple. We have a question there.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course, please.
As for the experience, right? A lot of us come from a background that is not necessarily in tech, but we do have some years of working experience. Would that still be applicable on an application?
That's a really great question.
In my case, it would be mechanical engineering, for example.
Yeah, I think if you have something like projects where you are using, if it's like more development focused, I would try to add that higher up, just because like the hierarchy, I feel like should really be the most relevant like directly relevant things to the position towards the top if possible, just so that they'll, you maximize the chances of them actually seeing it. And if you think about just like where they're coming from, the question really is like, okay, I have this position that I need filled. I need a Go developer or whatever, JavaScript developer. I need a data scientist, that knows Python or whatever it is. And that's really like the lens that they're kind of looking at this through. So like the earlier in the resume, you can kind of show those kind of keywords, and say like, yeah, I do have experience in this thing, the better. So if it's like, if you had like the experience kind of up top and it was like manual, or sorry, whatever it was, like some engineering that was not directly related to like software, then I feel like it's maybe going to be a little bit distracting. You know what I mean? So I would probably have that a little bit lower and try to really prioritize things that are more like development focused. However, I would definitely include it though, because that is also obviously very, I mean, it's somewhat relevant, and you can definitely create kind of like a narrative around that. And I want to talk about that a little bit more later in like the non-tech part of this discussion, but I do think it's good to include.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So yeah, that's pretty much it as far as like the resume. I think, yeah, it's just like don't overcomplicate it. I wouldn't add like colors and multiple columns and all that stuff. I think it just distracts, to be honest, from the real main point. So this is kind of the template that I would personally go with. Okay, let me see if I can jump back to the. Okay, can you see this? Yeah, I think I covered all this, like simple design, no objective, maybe like a summary instead. Yeah, usually an English resume is fine. It really does depend on the kind of company. Here in Japan, of course, if you have like a more domestic Japanese speaking position, they might want like a Redek show, like a Japanese resume. But for most of like, I mean, the kinds of companies that I work with Japan Dev, and most of like the more modern focused job boards will really be like more international companies where they're usually okay with like an English resume. In fact, it can actually be like a good filter for finding the more like, I guess, foreigner friendly companies where they do have people that are able to, take English resumes and understand them. And they don't have like a super strict process for like a format for a redirect show or things like that. To me, that's actually a little bit of like a red flag potentially, assuming that you do want to be with like more of like an internationally focused company. If you want to just go full on and like really learn Japanese or something like that, then it might make sense to actually have like a redirect show and like all the do the normal like Japanese style documents that you would want. But I personally recommend just having like a basic English one. And yeah, so that's what I would do. And then next up, I think there's the question of the cover letter. And you may even be wondering, like, do you need a cover letter at all? And that's a good question. I think it also is a question of like, what is a cover letter really? Because it's true that like, you're not going to be like literally printing out your resume probably and like pasting stapling another special like letter on top of it or anything like that. So I think it's a bit of a misnomer now, but it's true that pretty much any platform you use, there's going to be some kind of space for like a message. So whether it's like you're applying via email or through like an online system, there's almost always a way to have like a kind of a personal message to the company or the hiring manager. So if there is, I highly recommend using that space. Don't leave it blank. Don't write like a single one sentence thing. I would at least do like a kind of a casual but respectful, simple kind of message similar to what I have here. Like, oops, sorry. Dear hiring manager, thanks for taking a look at my application. Introduce yourself, whatever kind of experience you have. Like, ideally, whatever is like the most relevant to the specific position. Just like kind of quickly, concisely kind of explain that, and say, kind of talk up the company a little bit. Like, I've seen what you guys are up to. I love your product. I love what you have been, I've seen some of your open source work, stuff like that is great. And just, 5-6 sentences, like casual is totally fine. Again, the big thing here, I think, would be just to tailor it to the position. The more that you can like focus directly on what that position is looking for, the better, I would say. So that's kind of my one one piece of advice when it comes to cover letters. And then I guess the only other thing is like be positive, because one thing that I see a lot with cover letters, and I've seen many of them, thousands. First of all, they tend not to be very good. Like I mentioned, they have, I mean, a lot of people would literally just have like one sentence, like basic, please see my resume attached, or things like that. That is terrible. Please don't do that. At least like have it be kind of like friendly. And the other thing too is just be positive. You would be amazed how many people start their cover letters by like kind of criticizing themselves. They'll say like, hey, I don't have any experience yet, but, or I don't have a software engineering degree, but, and like, don't do that. Please just focus on the positives. And like when they look at your resume and they talk to you, they'll figure out, you know, whether you have experience or not in these things anyway. So this is kind of one of your few shots to like really talk yourself up to the company. So I would say, please remain positive. And I can definitely see the desire that people have to like kind of show their humility a bit and say like, hey, I know I'm not like the ideal candidate, you know, and try to be like honest. That doesn't really work though. So I would not recommend doing that. So that's cover letters. All right, let's talk about coding interviews. Japan is a little weird in that it's a bit different from the US. Like I mentioned earlier, not everyone is going to have a coding interview, but I think that the trend is pretty clear. More and more companies are doing it. Back when I worked at Metacarty, we were definitely using this. We had, I mean, it's been on the team because it's a big company, but we would use like HackerRank. I know a few companies used Codility, and you know, all these platforms are very similar. Basically, it's an online like IDE, and there's a question, and you have to basically solve it in usually it's like 30 to 60 minutes or so. It's like a timed thing. And then, yeah, it's pretty advanced these days where like they can kind of step through and like see how you solve the problem and things like that. So yeah, I think this is going to kind of become the standard. Yes, not every company is going to be using it, but most of the top kind of like higher level companies will. So if you are looking to like earn a pretty good salary and work at like one of the more sort of modern companies, I would say you would want to prepare for this. And yes, some of the platforms like I mentioned, you'll see is HackerRank, Codility, LeetCode, possibly CoderPad. There's a few others. There's so many now. It's hard to list them all. But the main, yeah, I mean, I think the point really is there's not a lot you can do except practice and just do similar problems. I would recommend using LeetCode. And within LeetCode, you know, there are like hundreds of problems. There's like easy, medium, hard. There is, I mean, there are a few like basically curated lists of problems that I think make it a bit more efficient. Like if you really want to like take your kind of coding, like online test coding kind of skills to the next level, there's a thing called Blind 75, which I do recommend. And then there's a bunch of like similar concepts where it's like someone basically goes through and you know, categorizes the questions and finds that like some of them are more important than others. So you can kind of like get by with, instead of doing all 100, you know, however many hundreds or thousands of questions there, you can do just like the 75 most important ones and get like 90% of the value. So I would try to do that and be very efficient in like which questions you are working with. You can also kind of like, there's some lists and stuff online too of like companies and what you know, what questions they're most likely to ask. And there's a thing called LeetCode patterns, which is also pretty cool. Like kind of, again, categorizes the questions into the different categories. So I would definitely look into that if you are trying to prepare for one of these coding tests. And then, yeah, so those are the online ones. And then there's also in-person. Preparation's pretty much the same. There's just, it's kind of pattern matching. You know, there's just certain, there's like binary trees and graphs and, you know, hash maps and all these things that you just have to kind of use them enough times to really see. I know some of you are like in the data science side of things, so it's a little bit different. But I think it's not too different though. One question though, I guess, is what language should you use? I think Python for data science is like pretty much the clear winner. It's a great like kind of online or in-person coding language to use just because it's like very expressive. Kind of everyone can understand Python code, you know. Personally, I think JavaScript is another good option just because it's become so important, you know, really anything in front end is going to be JavaScript based. So you really can't go wrong learning as much JavaScript as possible, or TypeScript potentially these days. You can even use it on the back end, obviously, and that's growing more and more here in Japan. It's already pretty big, outside of Japan too. And I think again, the trend is quite clear. So I think if you're drilling leak code, Python's great. JavaScript, I think, is also great personally. Some of you might prefer Ruby. Ruby, I think, is not quite as good of an option, to be 100% honest. If it's like by far your best language, then it might be okay. And especially like on the online tests, it's generally fine. They can usually handle all these languages, so it doesn't really matter that much. But for the in-person, it also matters like what languages your interviewer knows. So I think Python and JavaScript are usually a bit more of a safe choice than Ruby, which is a little bit unique. And so unless like it's way like your Ruby skills are way better than your other like JavaScript or whatever, I would probably not choose it personally and try to go for like Python or JavaScript instead. But yeah, you have to make that choice though for yourself. And of course, if it's like a Ruby focused position, then it's probably totally fine. So I think it's just something you need to kind of think about. And then in general, like you got to ask questions. A lot of times, like especially like the kind of FANG type, like full day like interviews, they will want you to basically ask questions. Like they'll give you this kind of vague question, and then you'll have to like kind of dial in order to get a better answer, and then kind of start general and fill in. And I think that is generally the way to do it. And that goes for the code as well. If you can like kind of scope out like a general solution, and like talk through it, make sure that you're on the right track. It's not usually a good idea to just like start writing like full on like complete code. It's more like mapping things out and then filling it in as you go. And then I would like mentally kind of test your code, like go through the edge cases and think about if there are things you've missed and things like that, because they really want to see that process as well. Take-home tests are another, like they're pretty common here in Japan. I like them personally a bit more than like the time tests, I would say overall, but they do usually take longer, so that's the trade-off. I think with take-home tests, there's usually a chance to kind of explain why you did things, and that can actually be really important because sometimes they'll see, like if you solve a problem, you may have like interpreted something a little bit differently, and it might look a little bit off to the interviewer, but then if you explain it, they're like, oh yeah, I see, like how they could see it that way, and that actually makes a lot of sense. So I would definitely try to explain that. Again, like have very clear tests for this, because you have enough time that it should really be like kind of the ideal code. Like essentially, like from the interviewer's perspective, it's like, hey, we gave them whatever it is, like a weekend to do this. We gave them 4 hours to do this. This should be like their top, like the best they can do. So you should at least understand that they're going to be assuming that's like kind of your the best you're capable of. So I would definitely be aware of that when it comes to take-home tests. One I guess quick tip is you can check out like their GitHub. If you know like what team it's going to be for, if they do have any like code up on GitHub, you can kind of check it out and see like how they code, try to make it kind of similar to that, because then there's a good chance that they'll be like, oh yeah, cool, this is like how we write code at the company, so that's something I would recommend if you have time. And then system design is another thing. This, I feel like it's not as common in Japan. There are a few exceptions, like the big international FANG companies like Google, Amazon, and then companies like Indeed as well. They do like it's usually like a full day, like several algorithms and data structures interviews, and then also like 1 or 2 system design, along with some behavioral interviews as well. So in that case, again, it's just one of those things you kind of have to practice. But I think what's more common is that there will be kind of like a discussion-based interview where you'll have to talk through like a project that you've built. So I think one kind of quick win to prepare for this type of interview is just to have one project that you just know outside and in, like and think about like what questions you could be asked about. Usually it's things like, did you run into a problem when designing the system? Or what was a time when you had to like did you have to cache the results of some API to be faster, or things like that. And those are really trying to figure out like if you really understood the system or not, and like how big of a role you played. So if you can understand like one, even if it's just like a project, if you can show like you were kind of one of the key people that was really understanding and building it, I think that goes a really long way. Personally, I prefer these interviews to like the FANG, like it's like redesign like a link shortener or whatever. I never really liked those interviews personally, but you will see those too. I like Amazon and Google. So that's one thing I would say. Cool. All right, let's talk about things that don't involve coding. The first question that I usually got asked, like I've done a few hundred interviews probably at this point, and I feel like the first question that I almost always got was this: why do you want to work here? Sometimes it was like, why do you want to be in Japan? Like, why here? Why Japan? You guys are already here physically in Japan, so it's probably more a question of like the company, like why do you want to be at this specific company? And I think it's important to have a good answer for this because it kind of sets the tone for the rest of the interview potentially. It can kind of make or break you, to be honest. If you don't have a good answer to this, then it might kind of sour them on you a little bit. And I think it's really important to remember, like, they don't actually care, like from your perspective, why it is you want to work there. What they're really trying to get at is like, are you a good fit for this position? And like, from, if you're a hiring manager, it's a little bit of a risk, at least they see it as one. Like each person you take into the team, they could potentially not be a good fit. They could make things worse just by joining, in the worst case. So it's like, what is it about this person compared to everyone else that makes us like convinced that they're going to be a good fit and like work for us for a long time and provide value to the company? And I think you kind of have to figure that out for yourself. But one thing I really recommend doing is like having kind of like a narrative. It's a little hard to explain, but like I think storytelling is really important. And sorry, what I try to do, at least when I was interviewing, was I would try to have this idea of like a narrative, because I don't know if maybe you have, I mean, if you've ever interviewed someone, I think you may know that it's very common for people to basically do like some cursory research about the company beforehand, and they will see like the press releases and like some of the homepage of the product, and maybe they'll try out the product a little bit. And that is what most people do if they do any research. Of course, there's people who don't even really know what they're walking into sometimes. And that is like better than nothing, I would say. But as a hiring manager, I think a lot of times we would have people who clearly like looked into the company at least, and they remembered like a few facts. They'd be like, hey, I saw you got this this milestone of 10 million users, and it's like, yeah, but the question then is like, is that really what the hiring manager cares about? And to me, it's usually no, it's not, or if it's like, I saw that you got this new funding because they're reading TechCrunch or whatever. And it's like, I saw you got this funding round, for $5 million. That's great. That's like, yeah. And if I was like the CFO, maybe I would really care about that because maybe I participated in getting that round and everything. But for an engineering manager who's probably going to be like, kind of the main decision maker, that's not really like keyed into their day to day. You know what I mean? So what I would try to tell people is, instead of doing that, instead of like finding disparate kind of like data points about a company and trying to show that you did research and put effort in that way, I think it's better to basically think about your own past, your own story up until this point, and then also think about like the company, and like, again, their story. And if there are, usually there's like blog posts and stuff like that where you can kind of figure it out. And you can see like the tech blog as well, see like where they're at in terms of like, are they switching from monoliths to microservices? Are they, using some interesting technology or something like that? You can kind of get like the story of the company. And I think the question then is like, where do those two things like kind of converge? Like, because the hiring manager, that's what they're really going to be thinking about. It's like, day to day, building this product, we have these goals. We want someone who can help us kind of reach those goals, who understands our vision. And that's kind of hard to prove, but I think it helps a lot if you can kind of connect your own background and like what you've been doing up until now, especially if you're like a bootstrap, or sorry, not bootstrap, boot camp grad, and you have like kind of a unique background, then you can kind of weave this kind of I guess narrative where it's like, up until now I was doing this, but now I am working as a developer and I really want to be able to do this. And I saw that that is something that you also care about at this company. And if it's like something concrete, then I think it can actually be a lot more impactful than like trying to, again, like have data about the company, things like that. So let me give you an example, because I think that's kind of vague. So when I joined Metacardi, so is this, yeah, so I don't know if you've heard of Metacardi before. It's like basically like a peer-to-peer marketplace app. And it was the first unicorn to ever come out of Japan, technically. So like the first $1 billion plus tech company. And that was like a kind of a big deal at the time. So this was about 6 or 7 years ago. And that was kind of their story. It was like, Metacardi is this marketplace app that is worth $1 billion as like a private company. And they are kind of doing it the Silicon Valley way. They are taking funding, you know, doing the usual Silicon Valley thing where they reinvest all their profits rather than trying to like take profits earlier, and really going for like kind of shooting for the moon as like a venture-backed company. And then within that, they were also expanding globally, like right as kind of I was looking for a job. And they were expanding into the US market specifically. And I kind of saw that and I was like, I came from the US. So like I kind of grew up around that like mentality of like Silicon Valley and saw a lot of those earlier, the FANG companies, saw that success and everything. And, I said like, okay, so they're kind of doing something similar where they're trying to like emulate those companies, but here from Japan. And I realized like I am kind of like right in the middle of that too, because it's like I'm from that background, but I want to, but I've been working in Japan. I was not super happy with like how a lot of the companies worked and how they were not really shooting for the moon like this. And I was like, I think it would be really awesome if I could use my skills to like help a company like this and kind of mix my background and like my the fact that I speak English and Japanese. And I feel like this is kind of the perfect place for me, right? And I was able to kind of explain that to them and say like, I've been searching. I've worked in several tech companies now, and I've been searching for one who really understands like the U.S. kind of Silicon Valley mindset and is really trying to go global. And I want to this place that I've kind of made my home, Japan. I want to help take it to the next level and figure out what that looks like. And I've kind of built some skills up until this point, and this is what I want to kind of use them for. So I think that helps me like really connect, because the hiring managers are kind of thinking that along those same lines, like, what can we do? Like, what are these other companies in the US and overseas doing? And is this the right person to help us do that? And it's like, yeah, actually, because he's from the US, he has this kind of same mindset as us. And to me, I think that really helped me like kind of prove to them that I was thinking along the same lines as them, rather than like, hey, I heard you guys have 10 million users. You know what I mean? It's a lot more like sort of concrete. Another example, because you can also kind of tailor this based on the company and based on the position. And I would definitely recommend doing that. Because before Medica, I actually worked at this company called Quipper. It's like a subsidiary of Recruit. And it's basically an online English teaching platform for the Japan market. So my story with them, I feel like, was okay. I worked as an English teacher. I saw the need, the need for English education. I saw how many students still are not really at the level that they need to be to really have an impact globally, right? And it was like, I really, because I moved to Japan initially to do that, to help with English teaching. And then I also, after that, learned skills as a software developer. And it's like, okay, so how can I put those two things together? Use my skills again as a developer, to write code and build a product that is going to help those same kind of English teachers and English learners that I was trying to help before. So then you can kind of see that path, though. It's like from English teacher to software developer, and it's like, where does that intersect with Quipper's story? Because they were an international edutech, education startup that was bought by Recruit, and then they're focused on teaching English. So it's like, I also really want to teach English, and to me, this is like an opportunity to kind of take what I was doing individually on like a kind of a small scale before, which I kind of proved that I care about by doing it for a year, and then kind of go pro and really have more leverage. And like, instead of helping one student, build a platform that helps many students. So it's like, that is where the company is at too. It's like, how do we grow this platform, help more people learn? And it's like, I am also someone who wants to help people learn English, as I've shown with this past, and I think that my skills would really like gel well with like what you guys are trying to do. And I think that just sounds a lot more persuasive, you know what I mean, than what most people do, which is they're just like, hey, I heard you were an edutech startup. That's cool. I like that industry, It's like finding that the connection between your own past and your own mission, basically, and their mission, and being able to kind of talk about that, I think is so important. So as long as you can do that, I think that can make up for a lot of like, lack of experience in the harder side of things, like the coding, and things like that. Because it's like, you can just convince them that this is someone that we want to work with, who wants to work with us, understands our mission. And I think that's kind of the one thing you really can control, even if it's like from one day to the other. If you have an interview coming up next week, you can look into that company, figure out what their mission is, like what are their engineers talking about to each other, you know what I mean? What is like the day-to-day looking like, and how can I kind of prove to them that I could kind of jump in there and really use what I've done up until now, and help them, because that at the end of the day is what they're looking for, I think. So I don't know, that's like the kind of the non-tech piece. Like, if I could give one piece of advice, it was like, just think deeply about that. And because if you just memorize facts and stuff like that, it's kind of obvious, when you're trying to like talk to them in an interview. Maybe you have like some canned responses to stuff, some specific questions or whatnot that you've kind of set up. But if you have like thought about it a little bit more deeply and figured out like what is the connection between you and the company's story, then I think it's a lot easier to be like organic and kind of talk about that, and potentially really convince people to hire you. So yeah, that's kind of my advice when it comes to that. I think in conclusion, yeah, have a good resume, cover letter. There's really no excuse not to. You just, I would say personalize it to the position. In terms of the coding exercises, there's really no shortcut. You can drill leak code. I would try to, categorize the types of questions and stuff, so you're doing it pretty efficiently. I would use like a language, probably Python, potentially JavaScript. I think that's about as high ROI as you can go in terms of like the coding itself. And then for companies, I would research each company, find your narrative, where you guys can kind of find common ground. And that I think is going to be a lot more persuasive to companies for why you want to be there, why you think that you could provide value to them. So yeah, those are really I think the main takeaways for me. Here's a few resources, basically just stuff I linked to earlier, and I can share these slides later too. But like, if you are looking for a job, we have a job board, Japan Dev. We try to make it super curated for only kind of English friendly, again, like Silicon Valley style type companies. We try to avoid like the more domestic, kind of old school Japanese IT companies. And then, yeah, developer resume guide, template, if you just want to use my template. And then, yeah, the blind 75 and like some of the leak code stuff as well. I think that's about it. But if you have any other questions, then yeah, please go ahead. Jairus?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. A quick question on updating your resume, CV, etc., customized for each company. When working with a recruiter, for example, they would usually just, they have their database, they take the resume that you give them, and they just send it to whoever they think you would fit with. They don't really give you a chance to update a resume specifically for each company.
Yeah.
have you ever heard of an approach where you can actually ask your recruiters, hey, please, before you send something out, come back to me, I'll send you an updated version. How would you go about this?
You can probably work with the recruiter. It's actually a pretty good question. I think usually recruiters will have like a handful of like kind of partner companies that they work with, and they have like a pretty good knowledge, I think, of what kinds of positions each company is for. Maybe they have like a history of introducing people to that company before, so they probably have like a decent handle on what they're looking for. So if you tell them like, hey, for this position, it's like a Python related position, so like here's a more like Python focused resume, I think they would generally be open to that, because like from their perspective too, like they're incentivized to help you basically get a job, because they only get paid when you find something through them. So if that's going to increase the chances of that going through and you actually getting that interview, I think it makes sense, like incentive wise for them. So I would imagine most recruiters would be open to that. And to be honest, like if they're not, that might be a little bit of a red flag potentially, where it's like, nah, whatever, just give me one and I'll just send it to everyone. Like that to me shows like they're maybe not the best person to be working with, maybe, right? Because they're kind of just spraying and praying, and that also suggests that maybe the companies probably aren't gonna like. Usually, companies really prefer to work with recruiters that are a bit more, thoughtful, and really only send them applicants that they know are like great and really good matches for the position. So I think companies would like to work with those people as well. So yeah, I imagine you can probably convince most recruiters to do that.
Right, thank you.
Leonard.
So regarding we in the bootcamp, most of us, or some of us, don't have the background of or work experience background of coding.
Yeah.
So in your classic CV style that I also kind of use right now, it doesn't necessarily show up except in a summary that you did something where you want a career change from. So how would you mention that best in the CV to not like with the work experience on top and the summary? How would you mention that best? What we learned now here.
What what kind of, is it like a different kind of job or like a different industry? It kind of depends potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I worked so far in finance, and it has nothing to do with what I plan, or not much to do with what I'm planning to do. And it's kind of hard to mention in your template where I want to head at, except in 3 sentences in a summary. So my question is, how would you do that best if you're changing industries?
So you said you're data science or like
data science, yeah.
Well,
and I worked before in a development bank with 0 coding, nothing. So it's a question where to mention that switch, basically.
Yeah. I mean, in that case, yeah, I mean, it's not super relevant. So I don't know that I would even mention it in the top kind of part of the resume, to be honest. Ideally, you would want to kind of replace that. I mean, not replace it, but like have enough of like a relevant, like whether it's like personal projects or things like that you can focus on instead, that are a bit more attuned like toward that job, right? And then I would maybe just mention it maybe under experience. So in that case, I might just do like a summary as focused as you can on like projects and things like that, and then a projects list. If you're using the same like Python libraries and whatnot, and then under that maybe experience. And yeah, it is still possible to potentially like connect the two. Again, that is more like going back to what I was saying about like the non-coding portion, where it's like what was like the underlying kind of goal that you had then that you still have now that you're trying to reach through coding, and that you think they can help you reach. That's more like an interview kind of topic, but of course it doesn't help you unless you get the interview, which you need the resume to get. So you can kind of potentially write something under like the experience section, or possibly in like the message, like the cover letter as well. The more you can kind of show the effort that you've put in to understand that company, I think the better.
But that's also in the interview though. So that's what the research you do for the company doesn't show up in the CV, right?
It kind of does on the cover letter though.
Yeah, on the cover letter, yeah, that's true.
That's like the chance, I guess the main chance to really like show that you have researched them, and that it is, you know, you have kind of like a vision for why you think that your skills would be useful there, including, you know, your skills from finance, which, you know, may not directly translate as much, but it can still be like impressive, you know.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, sorry. So like we kind of have our times are coming, so I will take one last question. Does anyone have a question to Eric? Okay, well, in that case, thank you, Eric. And I'm sure like Eric can like share the links later.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.